Hi all and welcome to another chess news video. So today I want to continue my coverage of the St. Louis 2018 Rapid and Blitz chess tournament, and more in particular I want to take a look at one of the games played by Mamedyarov. Now Mamedyarov is currently the world number 3 in the world, and he has been on a roll for at least 1 year already. Apparently he got married, so married life must be doing him good. And he also came of a very strong performance in Biel, where he managed to outclass the field with 2 points ahead of everybody. Also in that tournament he beat Magnus Carlsen, and I think it was the very first time he did so in a classical over-the-board game. But in this Rapid and Blitz tournament in St. Louis, he is also, he is currently in the lead actually with Hikaru Nakamura, if I'm not mistaken, and he's playing very enterprising, very strong, very interesting, very classy chess once again. So I want to take a look at his game against the same Hikaru Nakamura that I think was played during the 5th round, I'm not completely sure. But without further ado, let's get right into the action. So here it is Mamedyarov playing with the white pieces against Nakamura with the black pieces, obviously. And we enter the fray after black's 15th move, which was rook f to e8. Now in this position we can see that white has the so-called hanging pawns. And structurally speaking, we could consider those hanging pawns very similar to isolated pawns. They have the same characteristics as structural weaknesses. But here, with still so many pieces, actually all the pieces on the board, they still constitute more of a strength, because they also represent space. And the side with more space generally likes to have more pieces on the board, and here white still has all pieces on the board. But of course the question remains is, what are you going to do with those pieces? What are you going to do with those hanging pawns? Are you maybe going to push one of those, or are you going to keep them abreast as some sort of strategical springboard for a piece attack on, let's say, black's king side? Well, Mamedyarov answers that question for us. He plays d4, d5. And in doing so, I must say, he's really playing with fire. Because let's not forget that with black's last move, black posted up his rook vis-a-vis the white queen. But white says, well, I don't even mind you opening up the e-file and unleashing your rook against my queen, because I think you've got nothing there. Well, I think that personally I would have been a little bit more careful playing d4, d5, but Mamedyarov knows what he's doing, and as mentioned, he is playing very enterprising chess. So d5 was played, and Hikaru Nakamura answered now with e takes d5, opening up this e-file. So there are 2 ways to recapture now on d5. The most cautious way to recapture would have been with c takes d5. Then yes, there would have been a discovered attack against the queen, but white would be able to contain that discovered attack. For instance, bishop a3, and then after queen d2 and an exchange on b2 and let's say knight a5, the position is really rather balanced. And probably Mamedyarov didn't really like that. So instead of recapturing on d5 with his c-pawn, he recaptured here with his knight. Now this is clearly the most enterprising, but also the more risky recapture. One difference, for instance, with recapturing on d5 with the pawn is that now it also unleashes the bishop along the long diagonal, and that's quite important. But since now the knight is on d5, it does allow black to exchange knights on d5 and only then play a discovered attack with the battery rook e8 and bishop e7. Now that he has moved his knight out of the way, which was sitting on f6, he has an extra possibility for a discovered attack. And here comes bishop g5. Now, did Mamedyarov miss this? I don't know. But at the very least, we can say that the bishop is hitting the rook, which is a piece of higher value, and the rook is hitting the queen, which is a piece of higher value. So isn't white going to lose material here? Well, yeah, probably he is, but I'm sure that he also reckoned with some other factors in the position, some more dynamic factors, and we will soon see what happens. Now, the position is very complicated because, as so often in chess, attacks can and should be answered with counterattacks to maintain the balance. There was, for instance, the counterattack bishop e5, which in turn hits black's queen. But then after the rather forced variation, knight takes bishop, and now not the discovered attack knight c4, after which queen d3 is a double attack and wins for white, but after knight e5, rook c1, and h6, chasing away that dangerous knight. Then after knight h3 and queen d6, again the position would be rather balanced. And again, I think that Mamedyarov would not really like this. He doesn't really have any opportunity to push his passed pawn, and he clearly didn't want to play like that. Note that after h6, knight h3 really is the only move, because knight f3 drops the d pawn, right? So black would be enjoying a considerable advantage there. So after bishop g5, bishop e5 counterattack would have been possible, but it would have led, as we saw, to a rather balanced position. And Mamedyarov is not after that. No, instead he plays again a much more enterprising and a faster move. He goes here for a very interesting positional queen sacrifice with queen takes e8 check. So Simon Williams would say, put that in your pipe and smoke it, right? Okay, well, let's not steal his line, even though I like his line very much. Well, obviously it's a check, and Nakamura took the queen, but now there's again a choice for white. He can take the bishop on g5 to try and restore the material balance as much as he can, or he can take the knight on c6. Now, what would you play? I think that it would be very difficult, for me at least, to calculate the consequences, but I think that I would have quite a clear-cut feeling about what the most principled move would be. So now let's first take a look at the move that was not played in the game. Knight takes g5 with many possible complications. So now the knight on c6 is hanging. So for instance, knight e7 could follow. White could push his d-pawn. But in this case, I would say that white does not really like this kind of exchange of the light squared bishops along the long diagonal. It seems to take the punch out of his setup, and after king takes g2, queen b7, check king g1, knight c6, d7, rook d8. The d pawn is firmly blockaded, and black seems to have the better of it. Now, the more principled move is d takes c6, keeping all the complications in the position. Let's not forget, this exchange here is attacked, but there is the counter attack also against bishop b7. So I feel that Mamedyarov's decision of taking on c6 here is a fine mix of intuition and calculation. And, well, it feels like the principled continuation as it tries to push the rampant passed pawn forward as quickly as possible, taking everything in his path, and also trying to involve the rooks and the bishops as quickly and aggressively as he can. Well, Nakamura took up the gauntlet, and he played here bishop takes c1, right? And for a moment, let's take stock here, and let's take a look at the material balance. Because currently, it's very funny, white is down a queen for only a bishop, or a knight, I should say. Well, that's a deficit of 7 points, right? So, has Mamedyarov miscalculated? How on earth is he going to regain all that lost material? Well, here comes an absolute shocker and beauty of a move. He plays bishop e5. Fantastic move. Okay, now before going into that move, let's figure out what would happen if he would just simply start recapturing pieces. So for instance, there is the obvious c takes b7, right? Pursuing the path of the passed pawn. But then after bishop takes b2, well, it turns out that again he's still down knight for queen, and there really is no follow-up. So this position is a clear loss for white. Also insufficient is rook takes c1, because then there is bishop a6, and after c7, queen c8. Again, the passed pawn is now firmly blockaded, and with such ideas as rook e7 takes on c7, black again is winning. So that, well, led Mamedyarov to play the move that he played in the game, but I'm pretty sure that he also must have foreseen this move, because otherwise, I mean, just sacrificing so much material. So he played here the brilliant bishop e5. Just let that sink in for a moment. It's really very beautiful what's going on here. Well, at least the problems posed to black were a little bit too difficult at this precise moment for Nakamura, because here he plays a move with which he forsakes his chance to try and punish Mamedyarov's risky play. The best move would have been to play queen a8, and this would have ensured black the better position. Now after rook c1, bishop c6, the passed pawn has gone, and white still suffers a very serious material deficit, and in the long run black would simply be winning this position. Also, the other recapture here doesn't really quite cut it, even though it is the best continuation. He should now, of course, take the bishop on b7, because in between that also attacks the queen on a8, so that after queen takes b7, white now also has time to recapture the bishop on c1. But again, the passed pawn has disappeared, and after a move like queen a6, it turns out that black has the better of it, and he can start playing for the win. Okay, so this is what Nakamura should have played, but instead of queen a6, instead of queen a8 after bishop e5, he played here rook e5. And there must have been something that he underestimated, because I think that he did see all the pitfalls probably that are presented to him by white's next move. White plays knight e5, very nice. Now this opens up, amongst others, the long diagonal for the bishop, so it really threatens to win the bishop on b7 whilst also maintaining the passed pawn. Of course, it also brings the knight closer, so it can harass the black pieces on black's half of the board, and of course the bishop on c1 is also still en prise. And now after this knight e5, Nakamura defends well, because he plays bishop a6, and with this move he avoids a few pitfalls and keeps control of the promotion square. Now for one, it turns out that black cannot take twice on e5, which was one of the pitfalls, since after queen e5, my gosh, it turns out that black is simply back rank mated, right? So also the weak back rank in black's camp is playing a very significant role in this web of variations. But it was also easy to go wrong after knight e5 with moves such as excuse me, let me get right back to where I wanted to go. after knight e5, yes, sorry, to go wrong with bishop c8, which of course leads to a back rank again. And it was also quite easy to go wrong with a move such as bishop a8. Because now it turns out that after rook d7, the threat of c7 and rook d8 is simply unstoppable. If black were to try and stop this threat, as he does later on in the game against the similar threat, then black's defense would fall short. Bishop g5 would follow to defend the d8 square, but here after c7, queen c8, we see the difference. The bishop on a8 is a target, and white will take on a8, and it turns out that after queen takes a8 and the beautiful knight c6, everything works like a charm, and white is controlling the d8 square sufficient times to force through the decisive rook d7 d8 on the next move. So, well, probably having seen all those pitfalls after knight e5, Nakamura defended very well with bishop a6. At least here the bishop is not vulnerable as the bishop is, for instance, in the bishop a8 variation. But of course, again, here comes rook d7. Again, the threat is c7, rook d8 winning. But here, bishop g5 is just sufficient to defend against that threat. Well, Mamedyarov still plays out all his trump cards. He starts with c7, queen c8 is played, and now, as mentioned before, there is no bishop g2 takes a8, so black barely holds the draw in this position. Note, by the way, that nominally white is still down a rook for a queen, and it is the presence of the passed pawn on the 7th rank and the coordination of the white pieces in conjunction with black's weak back rank that makes everything possible. And still, it ain't over yet, because Mamedyarov continues the assault now over the light squares with bishop d5. Now he's attacking the f7 square no less than 3 times. Now Nakamura reacts with bishop f6, and this move strikes me as funny, since black is not really threatening bishop takes knight because of, again, rook d8 check, right? The bishop has to maintain control over the d8 square, so he cannot really start taking the knight on e5 anytime soon. But as it turns out, this bishop f6 move, it does defend against white's main threat, which was rook takes f7. Now you want to play this rook takes f7 because then you would bring a very nasty discovered check into the position. And if you were allowed to do this without any serious consequences, you again, as white, would be winning. But now it turns out that bishop f6 was a good move, because for a moment the rook is of course not able to go to d8 anymore. So now bishop takes knight would be possible, and the discovered attack here in this case would fall short after king f8, rook d8, king e7, very smart, and now we have to regain material, rook d8 and bishop c8. But if we now take stock, it turns out that black is up a piece for a pawn, and he should be able to win this endgame rather easily. So back to the position after bishop f6, which was an indirect defense against white's main threat of rook takes f7. Now, well, you could say, well, then let's take with another piece on f7, right? But of course, knight takes f7 doesn't work because of queen takes d7 and black's winning on the spot. So what remains really here after bishop f6 is the move bishop f6, and that's also the move that was played in the game. This is a check. Now still, black can go wrong, but we would trust Nakamura to find the right continuation. The move to go wrong here is king h8, but then after bishop e6, which again still sets up a discovered attack, but also the added and very strong threat of knight f7 to d6, hitting the promotion square, white would again be winning. So after bishop f7 check, Nakamura played the correct king f8, and Mamedyarov continued here with bishop e6. It still remains scary, right? Because there is this battery along the light squares, and white may still be threatening a nasty discovered attack, something along the lines of rook f7, for instance. But now it turns out that after king e8, the king itself helps in the defense of the all-important d8 square, which in turn means that now bishop takes e5 has become a real threat. Therefore, white must now repeat moves and make a draw, unfortunately. But that's life, that's chess. So please note that here rook d8 check falls short to queen takes rook, c takes d8, equals queen check, king takes d8. And after f4 it seems that the position is maybe balanced, but black has the two bishops in this endgame with pawns on both sides of the board, and black will be able to create a pass pawn with his queenside majority, and we know that in those cases bishops are far superior to knights. So here with the bishop pair against the bishop and the knight, Mamedyarov would even still run the risk of losing the game, which is not the idea, right? So back to the game, where after king e8 Mamedyarov decided to repeat moves and make a draw. So he played here bishop f7 check, and of course the king was forced to go back to f8, and they repeated once more bishop e6, king e8, and after bishop f7 check the game was agreed a draw. Well, I thought that was a fantastic game, especially for a rapid game, and kudos to both players who played on the razor's edge there. I think the most beautiful move of the game really was bishop e5, setting so many pitfalls and being able to regain all the material and the initiative whilst currently nominally being down no less than 7 points. I mean, those are really quite rare situations. Anyway, that was it for this chess news video. If you want to play through the game analysis, I will put up a link in the video description below. So what remains is again our newly introduced acronym of SLC, St. Louis Chess. Please subscribe, like or comment. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video. Bye.